Hello and welcome to the third installation of AWA's Wild Thoughts podcast. My name is Bill Ingersoll, and I am joined today by Scott Daskiewich, chair of the New York chapter of the Native Fish Coalition. For the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be discussing one of our mutually favorite areas, the Five Ponds and Pepperbox Wilderness north of Stillwater Reservoir. This wild but inscrutable region is seen by few people, but it has accomplished some spectacular feats of natural recovery over the last 20 years. If you're already familiar with the Five Ponds Wilderness, then pull up a chair and have a listen. If this is all new to you, then pull out a notepad. Either way, this should be a fun conversation. So, let's get started.
Yeah, hi Bill. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm the chairman of the New York State chapter of the Native Fish Coalition. We're kind of a new group in the state, but our parent organization's been around since 2017, and we are focused on native fish preservation issues. And so, native brook trout are one of our primary concerns, and these special areas in the Adirondacks, like the Five Ponds, are certainly of great interest to us and preserving the fish that are there. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so am I. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think we should start by sort of introducing what it is and where it is that we're talking about. Hopefully everybody can see the map. So we're talking about this wild place in the westernmost part of the Adirondacks, in the northernmost part of Herkimer County, and butted up against Lewis County. So to me, it's sort of like the one of the back doors into the Adirondack Park, most easily accessed from the Lowellville, New York area. Stillwater Reservoir, is this man-made impoundment on the Beaver River, and pretty much all the land north of the reservoir is state-owned forest preserve. Part of it over to the west is the Pepperbox, and most of it to the east and well to the north of that is Five Ponds. It's pretty wild. This map kind of gives you a good idea of just the extent of what we the people own. So Scott, I'm kind of curious. When was the first time that you were in this area?
Oh gosh, probably since I was a kid. I mean, or younger, a lot younger, like many moons ago, going out on Stillwater Reservoir. It wasn't until probably about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago that I started to do some exploration on some of the ponds within the Five Ponds Wilderness area and some of the streams. And as you said, it's a fascinating area. It's a lot. If you look at the map, you'll see there's just a large concentration of some fairly surprisingly large bodies of water. I mean, I can't really think of another analog in the Adirondack Park that's like it. I mean, the St. Regis canoe area is very much more compacted with all the waters with easy portages, but the Five Ponds takes a little bit more effort to get around if you want to do some exploring by canoe. So it's a fascinating area.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that struck me is that it does have some similarities with places like St. Regis and maybe even a few others. Like Faro Lake is another densely packed lake region too. One of the things that kind of strikes me about this is that it's not quite so user friendly. You don't have the rock ledges with the picture perfect campsites on every corner of the pond. These are fairly remote, brushy lakes that would kind of appear that you weren't really there. They don't make it easy for you to get around or get to the water in a lot of cases, but they're beautiful. Um, and you're almost assured to find solitude at quite a few of those places, especially the ones the further north you go, the more likely you're going to find some peace and quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very quiet place. It from a historical standpoint, it's interesting to me because for a while. I mean, I think you could fly into a lot of these lakes,
Probably.
and people did for many years. You also could basically get on a train in one of the major cities in the Mohawk Valley or the Syracuse area, and within a fairly decent trip, you could find yourself at Beaver River Station, and you could grab a boat and then head on out, and that's what people did back in those days around the turn of the 20th century. That was a popular activity, and um, it's with the concentration of waters up there. It was a sportsman's kind of a place. Like you mentioned, there aren't a lot of high mountain views to attract the peak bagging sort, and it's basically you got to love rolling hills and mountains, and a lot of lakes, and these lakes, by all historical accounts, most of them contained brook trout and lake trout as native fish, along with the usual cohort of minnows that would accompany them. And unfortunately, as a consequence of their location on the Western Adirondacks, they get hit with prevailing winds and prevailing clouds, and therefore prevailing heavy precipitation that gets wrung out. And this area was the epicenter for I guess the worst hit of the acid rain problem that started being apparent back in the 1950s. And
Yeah.
a lot of these lakes have been pretty much chemically unsuitable for fish since that time. And
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it remains poorly known because because if there is no fish, then there's going to be minimal interest. The only people that are going there are maybe people like me. Because I don't fish. This never was my thing. So if I'm going to a place, I'm appreciating the aesthetics. The fact that it's wild and no one else is there, and there's wildlife around. But without the fish, you don't get a lot of the pressure. So when I started going visiting this area about 20, 20, about 20 plus years ago, it was still in the throes of acid. Acid rain was still a current topic that you could read about in regional people were still talking about it because it was still an issue. The solution was more or less brand new. It was um but it was still a thing that people talked about. And when I bopped around some of these lakes, it was pretty clear that not many other people were going there. Whereas now, like when I was my last visit back in May, as I'm getting ready to, my dog and I were getting ready to set off on a backpacking trip at the same trailhead. There were some other guys, with a couple of hornbecks getting ready to bushwhack into one of the ponds for a weekend of fishing. That was cool to see. Somewhat new to me because I've been going to these places and more or less having them to myself unless I bring people with me. Um, yeah. I showed this picture here because you mentioned before there weren't too many mountain views. This one here might be the only one I know of. It is a little bald summit not far from the Stillwater Dam. It doesn't have a name. Um, but yeah, this is the rarity for mountain views right here. You got this, but not much else
yeah,
worth going out of your way
that's a
for.
cool little spot though.
Yeah, it's not that if you know if you it's not that far off the road to Raven Lake.
Mhm.
Um, I'm sort of surprised there's not really a little herd path leading to it. Because it's not that hard to find, and there's when you get there, there's evidence that people have been there before. But yeah, this is like probably the mountain view of any note. There's a couple others that have some ledges here and there, but nothing spectacular. But it's definitely about the lakes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's looking at even looking at your picture, and if you spend any time on the reservoir, that there's just a lot of sand deposits. And all of these lakes they have a lot of bedrock outcrops, small ones, not real huge ones, but it's clear to see just from looking around that these lakes are what are considered by the acid rain scientists as thin till. They don't have a great deal of underlying sediment that would act as a buffer to the acid rain problem, which is another part of the reason why this area was so heavily affected. Um, so yeah, that's and why it's taken so long for a lot of these lakes to recover. So
Yeah, one of my favorite times of year is, I've been kind of scrolling through some photos just walking down memory lane here. One of my favorite times of year, as you can see, to visit this area has always been winter,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's real fun the bop across these lakes. I'm not entirely so sure about the last few winters. We've had some dismal winters this year and last year, where the last thing I wanted to do was go walk across some lake of unknown solidity. But
Yeah,
in
you don't
past
want to do
years,
that.
but in past years, this is like a dismal pond, way up in there. So it's just a really fun area to, like in the winter, like you can just go anywhere almost. So it's really really recommended if so long as we actually get a legitimate winter.
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that winter would simplify travel greatly, with the lack of heavy, there's a lot of witch hobble out there
Yeah.
to contend with if you want to go off trail. And so, yeah, I think probably winter, or the shoulder seasons is definitely the way to go if you want to get around. No doubt about that.
Now, when we were talking earlier, you were mentioning that DEC has been starting to stock some of these lakes.
They are. Yeah, they started an effort. Well, first thing they did back in the late '90s is they actually started to lime some of these lakes. So during the winter, they would get a helicopter and bring in pallets of agricultural lime, which basically just ground up limestone, and they would bring a small army of people in there with sleds and shovels to spread it around. And some of these lakes are, as you know, quite large, so I'm sure that took a fair amount of effort to do. um, but anyway, the effort here was to neutralize the acidity in the lake itself. If the lake meets a certain criteria for flow through, which is, I think, 2 turnovers in a year's time or less, so that all the limestone's effect doesn't get flushed out immediately. And what they found was they could restock these limed lakes, and the fish survived. And then they found very recently that they don't really need to lime a lot of these lakes anymore. In fact, they haven't limed the lakes in a couple of years, because they're actually recovering on their own, and they're finally able to catch up with some of the cation exchange that normally would take place in these thin soils, and be able to better overcome the acid precipitation, which is still falling in fairness, but just not as concentrated in the acid department.
Well,
So
as I recall, there has to be some ability of the soil to buffer the acid. So if the soil can buffer the acid precipitation, everything is good. It became a problem way back when the acid was overpowering the soil's ability to um, buffer that acid. Now, are they stocking it with Horn Lake rookies? Do you know, or?
yeah, most of the lakes are getting horn lakers up there. And there have been a couple of cases where uh, brook trout persisted in some of the very, very small tributaries. In fact, one lake that I went to, you could actually go up into this little tributary. I mean, it was basically a beaver flow that had a little spring outflowing to it that must have had a higher pH than the surrounding lake and everything else. And you could just see these little tiny brook trout up in there, and they survived for many, many years. And then when the lake itself became more suitable, they started to venture out in the lake, repopulated it, and It's spectacular. There's a well, not a rock shoal, like a gravel shoal at one end of the lake that if you paddle over in a canoe, I mean, this shoal is literally pockmarked with brook trout spawning red sites. If you go there the right time of the year, you can see them. It's actually amazing, and then they're clearly successful. So it's fascinating how this turns around over time.
Right. It was I was tickled too to hear that I heard about this over the winter, but there's a land trust called the Northeast Wilderness Trust, relatively new to the Adirondacks, but they've been snatching up a lot of like smaller properties, like a couple thousand acres, at a pop, and and managing them as what they call wilderness reserves. The small forested properties that they want to that may not be the wilderness with a big W. These 100,000 acre areas, but some impressive small preserves scattered all over the place, and most of them are kind of standalone properties. That they're not really associated with anything larger. But this year they did manage to buy this curious tract right here. If I can zoom in on it. Yeah, right here. This is just triangle connected to the square. Whoops, zoomed too far. So this is the Bear Pond drop. Bear Pond is this sort of pan shaped pond right here, sort of right in the middle of it. And this was like a um it belonged to the sons of some former International Paper employees, because International Paper owned this big triangular tract up to the north, Watson's East Triangle. They sold that to the state back in the mid '80s, but at the time, some of the employees were. I'm not sure if all these have the same story, but I know at least this one right here. Some of the employees of International Paper, they sort of carved out this little inholding for themselves, and passed to their sons. And actually, for a hot minute, I was actually an associate member of the club. I don't fish, I don't hunt, but a lot of those winter pictures that you saw, that was me and my friends going into one of the camps, where I had actually legal access to use that, and it was a great spot. But it sort of warmed me when I heard over this winter that New England Wilderness Trust has bought this property in full. Um, Closing one of these private inholdings in the five ponds, of which there are quite a few, or enough anyway. But there's one here at Raven Lake. There's one, two, three over here.
Yep.
But this one right here has been bought up. There's like a 10-year exclusive lease agreement where the original camp owners can still conduct their activities. But when that 10 years is up, this trust will own the land in full, and they eventually, I talked with uh their leaders. We had a nice chat over the winter, and I'm confident that this is in good hands. That they want to kind of maintain the overall spirit of the area, and kind of let it all go back to nature. So when that 10-year lease is up, the buildings will be removed, the roads will be allowed to grow in. So this will may someday become a full-fledged addition to the five ponds. So that's pretty cool. Because Bear Pond is one of the linchpins of this whole area. There's a nice series of canoe carry trails that lead right up to it from Kettle Hole Bay on Stillwater, which sadly very few people use. I walked them back in May, and they weren't getting much love. But maybe in the future, as more people are drawn to the area, is people like you go to fish, or people like me just go to look at the scenery. Um, you know, some of these trails might actually, which have been there for decades, might actually start getting some love again.
Yeah, certainly. On that Bear Pond tract, were they? What's the logging history on there? Were they actively so harvesting timber on that at all, or just kind of letting it be?
They were, 'cause, um, the tract itself was logged, but not to any high degree. And I will say, yeah, I should caveat that it's been over a decade now since I walked that property. But there was, so the carry trails come in. You can carry from Stillwater Reservoir to Raven. There's a carry trail from Raven Lake to Lion Lake, and then Lion Lake to Bear, and then one final little thing over to Diana Pond. That's the public access. There has been for a while. The people who access the camp, come in from the other direction, from Krogan, follow this road right here, and they have sort of like an ATV trail that kind of goes along the North Shore of Bear and kind of goes over here and peters out in this triangle. And walking that, it was logged, but not to any alarming degree. And of course, being this remote outpost, they had their own connecting trails to all these different ponds. So there was a way to get to the beach ponds, lower beach and upper beach. There was a trail leading directly to Dismal, and I'm sure if one poked around, you would find others. Now, 10 years from now, when this is all fully added to the state and this the camps are gone, I wouldn't expect to find those trails lingering for too much longer. But there is public access. The trust doesn't have any plans to create any public recreational facilities. No hiking trails, no campsites. But so long as you honor the exclusive leases, where the camp structures are, you can, from what I understand, recreate on the property now. So if you wanted to get the Bear Pond and go to the beach ponds or scout out that trail to Dismal Pond, so far as I know, it's possible.
Interesting. Yeah, Bear Pond was actually one of the few ponds in the Five Ponds area that never really lost its fish. It came pretty close. It had a very low pH for many years, and I know the DEC did some work with different stockings of strains of fish in there. I think they did end up settling on Horn Lake strain fish, and to my knowledge, they're still in there at this point. So.
Man, here it is. It's sort of it's got a boggy shoreline. So this was taken right at the very final carry trail, the one that takes you a hop, skip, and a jump over to Diana Pond. If people are looking to go back in there and recreate, there is a designated campsite. It's one of the few designated campsites that I know of that's actually on two ponds at the same time. So, so looking this way, you're looking at that's Bear Pond. But if you were to turn around, you're facing Diana Pond. So it's like, for the gimmicky side of it, it's there's only a handful of campsites I can think of that are actually on two bodies of water at the same time. So, got that going for it.
Yeah,
but yeah,
neat.
It's what was I going to say? I was so I mean, yeah, the logging history there isn't alarming. To the south, immediately south of Bear Pond, there was an area that was 30 years ago was logged quite heavily, and that you still see quite a bit of. So when that day that I walked into Bear Pond, if I can find the right photo, this is what I was walking on. These overgrown logging roads. So this was from a tract that the state bought 1990 or circa 1990, so a while ago. But it was the prior owner, as part of the deal, there was a transition period where both the logger and the state had access to the same property, and during the interim period, the visual evidence is that they liquidated the forest quite well, at least along the main trunk roads. So the hiking experience wasn't the most visually attractive. Although I will say that, I was, the first time I was there in the year 2000, the forest at that point was only aged 10 years, so now added an additional 23 years to that, and so there is visual, there is recovery going on. It's not just the lakes. The forests are growing back, and if you go, I'm sure if you get off that main tote road into some random direction, you'll probably find places that could have been untouched, for all anybody knows.
In that area, Bill, you in your travels around Bear Pond and that area, how much is left from the 1995 storm? Is there still a lot on the ground, or is that all pretty much rotted away? I mean, I know in my travels, it seems like a lot of that's looking pretty rotten and in the ground, but
Yeah.
I know certain areas were hit worse than others. So, you know,
Well, I'm going to tell you a secret. I was in the Five Ponds area, or I started exploring the Five Ponds area in 1999. When I was in my early 20s, and at that time, that was just a few years after the blow, the 95 microburst, or the derecho, we should call it.
mhm.
I kind of just blew in a straight line from the north west to the southeast, straight through this area, and level thousands of acres of forest. And going there in the 90s, and when all that was fresh, really scared the bejesus out of me. I'm looking at some of that blowdown. It's like, I do not want to go there. So, and this was a couple of decades ago now, but I still have that, we'll call it a superstition. So in 20 years ago, in 2003, I did bushwhack from here over to, I believe, the Hawks Lake. And it was the blowdown was sort of off and on. And when it was bad, it wasn't so much the blowdown, the horizontal trees that bugged me, as it was the fact that the thick new brush that was growing in was very difficult to squeeze through.
Yep.
But again, that was 2003. From what I've heard, and seeing people online posting pictures, and talking to people who've been there, is that the blowdown is increasingly a non-issue as far as getting around back in there. So it might be time to retire my superstition and start poking around deep in that area again.
Yeah, I have a feeling I might be doing a little of that myself. I think I mentioned to you when we met before. We have a signage project with New York State DEC where we're going to be putting out some bait fish signs for them, and I'm imagining that we're going to, because again they've stocked a lot of those ponds that are out there and don't have trails, so we'll get a good feel of how how things are out there in the ground when we visit some of those. So it'll be interesting.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left. So I guess, like, to wrap things up, is there like one memory, one experience that you had in this area that you'll never forget? The one thing that you'll take with you to the next life.
Yeah, no, like I mentioned, I think this area on the remoteness scale, I mean, I just remember arriving at that pond that I told you, which I got to keep that one
Yeah,
unnamed,
that's
but
fine.
that had the recovering brook trout. I mean, I just remember it was an overcast day, and the wind was calm. There wasn't any birds, or I mean, the silence out there was shocking. I mean, it was almost overwhelming how there's no noise out there because you're far back. You're away from civilization. And I don't know that for whatever reason that one sticks with me. I'm not sure why, but I just stopped hiking and I'm like, wow, this is really quiet. So
Yeah, I think for me it was quite a while ago. I was when I used to go winter camping a lot more frequently than I do now. Partly because the winters were more attractive, and partly because I was younger and less married to my warm bed at home. Yeah, I went to a Sunshine Pond, which is across the boundary here, over in the Pepperbox side.
mhm.
And this beautiful little spot. There's not really anything there. There's no trails leading to it. No, at least then, there were no established campsites. So I'm just off in the woods. Me and my dog at the time, doing our thing. And I remember just, sleeping overnight, and, in March, you have the shifting temperatures. It's relatively mild during the day, and still pretty frigid at night. And with the flexing temperatures, the ice itself is shifting size, so it all night long it was making the, what I call whale song, this real musical popping
Oh yeah.
sound as the ice expands or contracts or whatever. It sounds like you're camping next to a pot of whales, because this reverberating mellow is not what you expect. This real pleasant um sing song all night long, that you only get, over, in the cold night of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that noise. I know what you're talking about. It can be disconcerting when you're on the ice and it's doing
Well,
that. And
yeah, then you're not quite so pleased with it when you're not quite sure how to read it. It's like, should I be boogieing for sure? Is everything okay? Usually it's fine. It's just like that night when I heard all that popping and shifting and whale song. I expected to wake up to like this devastated scene in the morning, like all the ice is, broken up and heaved upon itself, but visually there was nothing to see. The ice was right still where it was. Is just shifting size or whatnot in the shifting temperatures. So,
yep.
well,
Cool.
I think we've covered this. It was a pretty a fun topic. So we're running out of time, so I'm gonna wrap this up. For all those of you who are joining us, thank you. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. This video podcast series is a new undertaking for AWA, and with your support, we hope to grow our wild thoughts theories into an entertaining entertaining and informative resource for all things Adirondack wilderness. Please share your thoughts and feedback. And remember that we are a small grassroots organization with a small budget and big ambitions. If you liked what you've seen, please visit us at AdirondackWilderness.org and click that donate button. Scott, is there a way that you want people to find and interact with your group?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, our Instagram, Native Fish Coalition NY. Uh, Drop me a DM. I'll get back to you if you're interested in projects involving native fish in the Adirondacks and other parts of New York State. And nativefishcoalition.org. There's a drop down menu for the states that have chapters. New York is on there. You'll find a whole bunch of information there.
Very
So
cool.
that would be the best way.
All right, sounds great. So that's all for tonight. So on behalf of both of us, goodbye for now, and we'll see you on the trail.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.